All right, good morning, everybody. It's really nice to be here today, and some really fantastic case studies this morning as well. We're going to talk about Anglo-American, and I'm going to hand over to Angie to talk about the gold-winning project that we had. She leads all the work that we do with Anglo-American there, and they're a really fascinating company to work for. They're really sort of complex challenges as an organisation, and people-led storytelling has allowed us to bring some real emotion into a subject matter that perhaps doesn't readily lend itself to that. I'm very much Robin to Angie's Batman today, so I am going to talk a little bit more about story structure. The reason for that is because it underpins the vast majority of the work that we do at Gorilla. The word story, I feel, is often misused. It's often used for series of facts, fact-telling, I call it, rather than storytelling. So I'm just going to share how we use story structure, not just to kind of craft our films and make them really emotionally powerful, but also how we use story structure to actually find and sift those stories in the first place as well. Over to you, Batman.
Thank you. Okay, so the mining industry's got a problem. I'm just going to give you a little bit of context to begin this. So people are worried about how things are mined and why we're mining. And I think when people think about mining, they think about this kind of thing. They think about tailings dam collapses, they think about massive social problems, they think about child labour, they think about environmental catastrophes. And while it's certainly true that there are places in the world where there's still deeply problematic mining going on, the big mining companies like Anglo-American, our client, they're very reliant on their social license to operate. And if they don't get that right, they're really in trouble. So they are hyper-focused on making sure that they have got really good records on social and environment, and just making sure that they look clean and good. But undoubtedly, there is a cost. And that really brings us to the point of thinking, why is it that we do mining? And it's really about the end-use products, right? It's about the cell phone in your pocket. It's about the communication network that makes that a useful piece of equipment. And it's about the transport that brought you here today. All of these things have got mined elements within them. So if we didn't have mining, our lives would be fundamentally different. And even things that we all believe in, probably like the green energy transition, would not be possible without copper mining. So that brings us to the brief that we got from Anglo-American. And really what they want to do was explain to people what's the why. Why are we doing the mining? And we pitched a series of films to talk to a mainly external audience. So that's like governments, that's stakeholders, shareholders and communities. And then something interesting happened when Anglo-American realized that actually the people who are actually mining, the people who are actually doing the work, they also didn't really understand what was happening to this ore when it left the mine. So the brief developed a bit. And the request was for a film that highlighted the why, but that would work both for an internal and an external audience. We started the thinking for this series with the first, which was a film about copper. And we knew we wanted to show where the metals and minerals were used in a human story, which meant that we give the audience the opportunity to connect on an emotional level for what could have otherwise been an incredibly dry information film. And this is really, talking to the storytelling that Dean's going to expand upon later. But we wanted to use an Anglo-American colleague in a really kind of, at the center of the film, have them sitting at the beginning, at the middle of it, and then have these sort of like end-use products sprinkled around the edges, sort of introduce them by stealth, if you like. So this is what we made for PGM. So I'm just going to play the video for you.
Platinum is the reason I can walk and ride my bike. Platinum compounds are integral to the chemotherapy drugs which help me in my own battle with spinal cancer. 10 times rarer than gold, platinum group metals are the building blocks to a greener future. I'm so aware that the precious resources we depend on are often found in remote locations like this one. My experience with cancer has altered my outlook. These days, I don't take things for granted, especially when I'm out here.
Right, so that was the film. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the production process. We started, as we often do, with the research phase. So we were looking into the ways that PGMs were used in order to give us the storyline, in order to find the story. And we started looking at, well, you know, that they're obviously used in jewelry and used in catalytic converters. But then we found all these other uses that were also really interesting. So, for example, used in glass making, in cosmetics, in medical, and a variety of different areas. So we were focused in on the medical because we were really looking for a story that would give us the opportunity to have a bit of a life and death conversation, to get that emotional connection. And you know, PGMs is used in cancer drugs and also used in making pacemakers. This allowed us to go to the client with a very strong casting brief. Because we'd used a younger woman in London to do the copper film, we decided we wanted to use an older guy in South Africa. And we knew that we wanted it to be someone who'd been through cancer or had a pacemaker. They went out to their teams on their newsletters. We waited, and then all the people started coming back. We found Bahale quite early on. He was someone who we spoke to. We spoke to everyone by Zoom. Obviously, they're all in South Africa. We were in London. And he had this great story of surviving spinal cancer, but he also had this great other bit to his story, which was that he was a keen cyclist and he loved to get out on his bike. And we had these visions of being out in the great South African landscape and showing him on his bike, really just showing how far he'd come, you know, from having cancer all the way through to living his best life on his bike. So we then moved on to the building of the team. Obviously, we had to have a team in the UK and a team in South Africa. We had a great scriptwriter in London called Kath Ireland, brilliant director, Richard Crombie, who a lot of you I'm sure know, and Stuart Luck was the DOP. And unusually, we took Stuart with us to film in South Africa, which we wouldn't normally do because there's amazing crew in South Africa. But we felt that it would be great because Stuart and Richard had such a strong relationship. And then, of course, we picked up brilliant people in South Africa. We then thought about the channels, very much thinking, you know, it's very much part of our thinking to think about how we're going to eventually have these films live. These ones obviously had to live externally and internally, which meant that we, in the end, went for the very simple approach. We went for a slightly longer one, which was used in a lot in community settings, internally, and also on LinkedIn, and the shorter one, which was used for other socials. We went to South Africa. We filmed in a very remote location just outside Lydenburg. All of the usual excitements, you know, kind of like drone failure, battery problems, you know, massive storms, lost a day for weather, you know, all of that business. But at the end of it, I think we came out with a pretty good film. And I think the emotional hook in the film, focusing on Bahale's story, really helped land the why in this mining story, particularly internally, where there was an enormous feeling of pride around it. And we got this great piece of feedback from Craig, who was at the time the CEO of Anglo Platinum. And you can see that he's like had this emotional connection to it, which is obviously, you know, was our whole reason for using storytelling in the first place. But he also talks about how this ladders up to the purpose. And I think the thing that I'm particularly proud of with this film is that feeling of pride internally really gave the colleagues like something to rally around and to go, oh, this is why I go to work every day. This is the reason that I do this. It's so that I can, you know, these great stories can come out at the end. So that was my personal happiness, but also the client was happy about the fact that it performed incredibly well for them, and it was one of the most successful films of the year on social. So they were happy too.
Yeah.
And now over to you, Dean.
Oh, amazing.
You can have the magic clicker.
Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Awesome. Thanks, Angie. For anyone who's wondering as well, PGM stands for Platinum Group Metals.
Do not say that.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that because
institutionalised.
I had to think about it when you were saying it. I was going,
no,
it took me about 2
sorry,
years to
guys.
work out what PGM stood for. So it's Platinum Group Metals. Okay. Okay. So as Angie was saying, you know, if you think back to that sort of research process and that casting process, you know, finding a really, really strong story was very, very important, and particularly to sort of deliver that kind of emotional punch. I often come back to this quote, you know, as a filmmaker, but also just from a kind of communications practice point of view, is this is what sits at the heart of the power of film, okay? This is how film can be really powerful. This is how it can get beyond just being an informational medium. You know, so making that emotive connection is absolutely where the power sits. And this is important stuff as well. You know, this is not just fluffy stuff, okay? You know, neuroscience tells us that actually if you want people to remember stuff, if you embed that in a story, people are way more likely to retain that information as well. So this is really important from a communications point of view as well. So how do we come at that? Well, I want you to think back to the little clip that we showed. That was the shorter version of the film. And just think about how that made you feel. You know, what was your immediate reaction to that? Okay? I mean, for me, it's always like a little, ooh, like a little tingle, okay? And for us, that's what we want, basically. That's what we want out of our story structure. I'm going to talk a little bit about more about why that is. So there's a squillion books out there about story structure. Most of them are based around kind of movies and things like that. The vast majority of the work that we do at Gorilla is based around real people and real stories. And so we've boiled it down to these key things here. And these will often be given different labels in different textbooks. These things will often overlap. Not every single story has to have all of these things to be successful. But if you can find and use the majority of these, if not all of them, you'll be on to an absolute winner. Now, two things I want to mention about this. The first thing is that we put the challenge right at the center in bold, red, coral, sort of weird color. But basically, the challenge for us is the thing that we're always looking for. Whether it's a business story, whether it's an employee story, we always look for the challenge first. So you can think about all those different areas that platinum is used within or copper is used within. We're looking for challenges behind that, both sort of societal challenges, business challenges, but then ideally going beyond that to find a human challenge. And if you want to tell those kind of individual stories about people, that's really what you're looking for. And that is what it sits at the heart of a story, is somebody overcoming some sort of challenge and learning and growing from that. Okay, that's what it is. That's what sits at the heart of every single different kind of story. So you can see with Bahali's story that, you know, and behind that sort of platinum story, you know, we found a really great challenge that had a really nice human angle to that, that we could then sort of plug in some of these different elements to it. I think the second thing that I wanted to say is that I think because we all work in comms, we all work in brand, this story structure always has to sit within your objectives, okay? Your campaign objectives or your wider messaging. It can't just live in isolation. Now, thinking back to Bahali's story, you know, there's something common that we find to every sort of good challenge that's going to make a good film, and that is that it's got a bit of a hook to it. You know, it's got two elements to it. One is that it just kind of grabs your attention and gives you that immediate little emotional spark. So as soon as Bahali says, you know, I had cancer, these kind of metals are allowing me to do this kind of thing, you're kind of like, oh, okay, right, okay. And this is the second part of the hook, is that it pulls you in and it wants you to find out more. And that's why a strong challenge is powerful. You know, so when we're very, very early on in the research process, before we've even got to make a film, this is how we bench test our stories. And we always urge our clients to be editorially robust, because often there are, like we had with Anglo, there's 5, 6, 7, 8 people on the page who are all potential candidates. But the more robust you can be about really digging into that challenge and seeing if there is a strong hook there, that is just a great thing to do purely from a return on investment point of view. We see a lot of people kind of falling into the trap of pushing forward with stories to take them into film, and actually they probably shouldn't be a film. This might sound like production company suicide, but we spend a lot of our time telling people not to make stories or not to make films about certain things because there isn't a strong enough story there. And from an investment point of view, it's probably better off as like a carousel. Use some images, use some text, and it can sit very beautifully in that format instead. So I think using story structure in this way, it's not just about how you shape the film itself, it's about how that can inform your research and your thinking process right from the outset as well. So kind of once we've gone through this process of kind of sifting things and sort of identifying that challenge and making sure that it's got that sort of hooky kind of nature to it, we then look at shaping these other areas about, what their goals are, is there any kind of growth and learning there, and what might be next for those characters. Now, one of the reasons why I was really pleased that we were showing the Anglo one today, because it shows that you don't necessarily have to tick every one of these boxes, okay? It's not painting by numbers, but you can see that there's elements of all of these things in there, and it's this structure that makes that film work. It's this structure that makes it watchable, that makes it powerful, that makes it pick up a couple of gold awards. So I would urge you to sort of take away that, and hopefully it can inspire you with your work after today as well. If you want to sort of dig a little bit more into the power of story, we've got more about the neuroscience and things like that on our site. We've also recently put out a sort of field guide, sort of connecting the idea of story and that sort of very authentic emotional power to how you can engender trust as well. And Angie and I will be around for the rest of the day as well, more or less. You're busier than I am today. So yeah, I'll certainly be here anyway, so do feel free to come along. But yeah, it's been really great to share with you today, and yeah, really looking forward to hearing the rest of today as well. So, thanks.
Fantastic, thank you. Do we have any questions? I've got a couple of questions. Great seeing that story structure. I thought that was really good, but presumably not all briefs, not all commissions kind of that come to you with comms challenges lend themselves to a story structure. Is this something, sometimes do you find yourself shoehorning this in? How does it work?
No, it's a really good question. I think ultimately you just have to be honest about what it is that you're making. And I think, ultimately video can be a really good kind of factual medium as well. And I think from that side of things, we tend to find actually you're leaning more into filmmaking craft in some shape or form, whatever it might be. I think the only danger with that is that you get into what I call kind of like emotional cattle prod territory. So it becomes all about the searing music. It becomes about, the shot of the little kids or whatever it might be, So I think for me, I would always try and lean towards story if I can in some shape or form, even if it's scripted, even if it's not around a real person. I think it's always more powerful. And genuinely, the neuroscience is there to back that up from just a pure recall, information kind of communication job. We had a piece of work recently for a big sort of global recruitment firm with very much that thing in mind where we couldn't really feature any people. They didn't have the budget to kind of go around the world. They wanted to use their kind of stock library. It's interesting, that's come up a few times today already, so how do you deal with that creatively? And we just found that we just tried to get the script to be more of a story. So it wasn't just a sequence of factual information, basically, which, you just find yourself tuning out of after sort of 20 seconds, So we built a story around their heritage, and it actually allowed us to use a wider spectrum of kind of stock footage that we could actually talk about the fact they started in the 1800s and have people in weird wigs and in horse and carriages, and it just gave us a bit more of a kind of story structure, not necessarily around a real person, but in terms of talking about where they started, where they went, what changed, how they grew, same sort of structure basically. So yeah, I think you can still use it even if there's not a real person's story there.
Okay, fantastic. Any more questions? In which case, you're going to be around at lunchtime anyway, aren't you? So, and certainly for the next roundtable discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dean, Angie. Wonderful.